Well, the famous William Tell Overture. Doesn't it sound glorious?
It does, yes.
Is that one of your favourite tunes?
It's the one we play most often, yes. Yeah.
Now, these were originally made to go into public places like railway stations and pubs, but this is in fantastic condition. Where did it come from?
Well, it was actually left to my father by his uncle, his great uncle, who was a watch and clockmaker. Had a watch and clock shop actually at Farnley, which is about 5 miles down the road.
Right. And we know who made it because right along the top there it says Symphonion,
Right.
one of the most famous makers in Leipzig, in Germany, in the late 19th and early 20th century. And it was these disc musical boxes that really took over from the, I don't know if you've ever seen the cylinder musical boxes,
Yes, yeah.
that could play 6 or 8 tunes. Well, the great thing about the Symphonium and the polyphons was that they could play endless tunes because you could buy more and more records. But they worked off a different principle. Let's just have a look inside. If we just take the disc out of the box, you'll see at the back of this metal disc all these indentations.
Yes.
And how it actually works is that they make contact with what are called star wheels, all these wheels here, which then pluck the comb and produce the sound.
Yes.
But quite a complicated mechanism, quite difficult to actually punch this on a machine in order to get the tune to play absolutely perfectly.
Yes.
Okay, we'll just put it back in now.
I understood that Great Uncle William took this as part of a debt
Right.
sometime in the 20s.
Well, not a bad thing to actually take as a debt, because something like this now is very, very desirable. And there are collectors both here in the UK and especially in Japan. The Japanese really like these mechanical musical instruments. And at auction, one in this condition would fetch between £4,000 and £6,000.
Oh, very
So
good.
The Cry of Love by Jimi Hendrix, as you know, if it was an album, because on this side it's Jimi Hendrix. And so I see on this side it is the very best of Bert Camford, which is very strange.
Yes.
And I don't know whether you know that the actual album of Jimi Hendrix, Cry of Love, in a pressed red record, there are only 2 in the world. And I'm just going to sort of let you down slightly lightly in that if it had been the red one of both Hendrix, we'd be talking about over £1,000.
Right.
The fact that you only have one side Hendrix, the other side Bert Camford, we're talking about between £500 and £700 at auction.
Right.
And it's unheard of. I mean,
Yeah.
as far as I know, it's the only one, unique.
Yes.
Today, we're lending an ear to a man whose special subject is rare acoustic guitars, Paul Brett. Hiya.
Hello, Michael.
Nice
How
to
are
see you.
You too.
So, how many pieces have you got altogether?
About 150.
Wow. So this is just a tiny selection.
It's a smattering. Yeah.
What was the one you were playing?
That's a 1926 Gibson L1, as played by the great Robert Johnson.
And you started collecting on the road, did
Yeah,
you?
very much so in the early 60s. I was touring with a lot of bands all over the world, so obviously we're picking up quite a lot in America, and some of them in very bad condition as well, coming being restored. But over the years, the scarcity and the collectability of these particular guitars have grown in stature with the advent of the blues and people like Eric Clapton saying that Johnson was the greatest blues player ever. It's just kind of legends are built up around them, so yeah.
What's the oldest piece you've got here, the oldest guitar?
1905 Stella, made by Oscar Schmidt. He was an immigrant to America, set up a company over there, and probably one of the most sought-after guitar makers now in the world.
What do you look for in a guitar?
Well, I look for the sound mainly, but also the history and the music of the people that played them. I mean, this one, for example, this one here was, I'll bring it off, that came in with a massive hole in the side. Because the old blues players, they cost a couple of dollars when they came out. They'd buy them, go out on a Friday and Saturday night and play for their supper, and then probably put them over someone's head and buy them again on, the next week. But this had a massive hole in it, and it was invisible mending by John Joyce. But, you'd never know there was anything wrong with it.
What's the loudest one you got?
The loudest one was that beast down there. Whoops. It's a Stella Westbrook, 1930s. It's supposed to have been owned by Blind Willie McTell, who's one of the greatest 12-string players alongside Leadbelly. of course.
Now there's a story. Leadbelly, he was a character, wasn't he?
He was. I think he was a very lucky man as well, because he was serving life sentence for murder, and the prison governor took pity on him and decided to manage him. And they launched his career over the world. It was a very, very successful player. In fact, if it wasn't for Leadbelly, people like, I suppose, Lonnie Donegan wouldn't have come into being, because Lon did loads of his songs.
And you played with him?
Yeah, I played with Lonnie. Yeah.
So?
And we did, Lonnie did Rock Island Line, Pick a Bale of Cotton, all Leadbelly songs.
Give us a burst.
OK, let's see what we can do.
Well, it requires no great expertise from me to recognise this as a cylinder musical box. If we have a look at the case first, nicely figured in burr walnut with a half veneer, and rather nice little banding around the edge. Now let's open it up. I hope it's a music box anyway. Ah yes, there we are. Oh, that's a nice example, isn't it? How did it come into your possession?
Well, it was in my grandparents' home.
Yes.
Which I remember as a child.
Right.
And we had to stand on stools to operate it.
Because it was quite high up.
Yes, because it was quite high up. And so I remember it from a
And I noticed that it's got 12 different tunes, which is quite unusual because a lot of them have 6 or 8 or 10.
Oh, right.
12 is a very good number.
Right.
Right. Now, is it wound up? Because I noticed that the levers are correctly positioned, but it's not going. Is there a special way of starting it?
Yes, I don't know whether this is the proper way, but...
Oh, right. Now, that's a fairly original way of starting it. And then you flick the cylinder round, do you? Yes, there we are. There we are, playing with the bells. You can see the cylinder turning round in the middle, and perhaps we can turn it off. Have you got a special way of turning it off?
I'm afraid we don't know how to turn it off.
Oh, you don't know how to turn it off? Well, I guess if we stop the little wheel going round, then hopefully, yes, there we are, that'll be all right.
Yes.
The mechanism, I think, is absolutely remarkable, because if you look at the cylinder here, these pins would have been individually put on by whoever made it. Amazing. And with 12 different tunes, you've got an astonishing number of pins. So really, it's almost a feat of engineering.
Incredible.
Do you know where it was made?
Well, the only evidence we've got is that it's got Paris on it, so I imagine it's French.
Well, I think not. I think
it's not.
because the vast majority were made in Switzerland.
Right.
It may well have been retailed in France or Germany, hence the French connection that you were associating it with. What about value? Have you had it valued?
No, we haven't.
No.
No,
Well,
we've no idea.
musical boxes are quite sought after these days by collectors. As I say, this is in nice condition, early example, 12 tunes. So you're probably looking at an auction value of perhaps £2,500–3,000.
Right.
Lovely example. Thank you for bringing it in.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
The Beatles show. That warms the heart to see those signatures. Now, it says to Biddy, love from George Harrison. Are you that woman?
I am.
Tell me what you remember of that evening.
Well, it was 1963.
Yeah.
I was sweet 16. I went to the Beatles concert
Here in Scarborough?
At the Futurist,
Yeah.
yes. It was a marvellous night. We had to queue for ages to get in. I sat 5 rows from the front. I couldn't hear them for screaming.
Yeah.
But I got their autographs due to my mother.
How was that?
Well, she was an usherette. It was her second job that she took in the evening.
Yeah.
And she asked an ambulance driver to get me the autographs. And he actually signed it. George Harrison, he was my favourite.
Oh, was he?
He was.
He was the one who actually said to Biddy.
Yes.
He must have known.
I don't know how he knew, unless my mother said, please get Biddy's autograph. I was in seventh heaven for the rest of the concert.
Well, not only is it a great memory, but it's also valuable.
Right.
Because there are lots of people out there who are desperate for an early signed
But what about the Biddy?
Doesn't really matter.
No.
People would change their names.
Yeah, I didn't.
And value, I would put it at around £1,500. It's a great object. And, as you say, a window on the past, but also something for the future.
It is, yes.
Thanks very much for bringing it.
Thank you.
Very good.
Just had enough.
Yeah. Well, that just proves that it's got a good tone.
Yeah, yes.
And what we're looking at is a cornopian.
Oh, yes.
Because at the date that this was made, that is between about 1830 and 1860, they weren't called cornets, they were called cornopians.
I know very little about it, actually. Only that it's possibly, or most likely, been handed down through the family and possibly played years and years ago by my wife's grandfather in a Salvation Army band.
Oh, it really was in a Salvation Army band.
Yes,
oh,
yes.
very good.
Yes.
Firstly, it's very attractive. I love all this sort of curly cues around here.
Yes.
And the next thing is you look a bit closer and you say, hey, there's something a bit dodgy with the valves. The invention of valves to get the notes only came in the 1820s. And in 1838, a man called Shaw invented this particular his system, which must have worked very well because, although finally it's died out now, it was actually used for many, many years. Now, have you played both types?
Played both types,
And what do you? What's the difference? How do you find this?
Well, this is a much slower movement than the piston movement, the valve movement now.
Right.
Much, much slower.
That's interesting.
Yes,
So probably that then decided the future of the Shaw system. There's something that I love about it, which is that you haven't cleaned it.
No, I was going to ask you about that, actually.
I mean, there are two schools of thought there, and particularly with an instrument that's used perhaps in public performances, people like to think that, a brass wind should be shiny
and clean.
But,
that's right, yes.
but to me, I know I bang on about this all the time. Something that's old, I think, should look it, and it's got this wonderful patina through here, this golden colouring, which lightens the grey, and I think it's wonderful to see. Here we have the maker, Kohler, of Henrietta Street. Here it is again, in London. Obviously of German extraction. The instrument itself is a rarity, and cornopians are very desirable. If one was talking about auction value today, we'd be thinking about perhaps between £1,000 and £1,500.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes, it's quite a surprise.
Had you had its case, that might have pushed it over £2,000.
Would it really? Yes.
So that does make an enormous difference. But as it is, it's a wonderful instrument.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
And go on using it. What an extravagant box in these magnificent settings. And if we open the lid, it gets even better inside. Now, we're looking at a serious bit of musical box kit, in that it's a box, tells us here who it's made by, perhaps one of the best known names of musical box manufacturer, Nicole Frere of Geneva. But tell me, I mean, I love these boxes simply because I think of myself as a bit of a mechanical nut. But why do you love them?
Well, I like anything mechanical, anything old, anything ingenious, and I admire the workmanship that went into them, all those years ago. So I have about 20 or 30 small musical boxes, but this is the largest one I have.
And was it in this condition when you got it? Because it really is in fantastic
I saw
state.
an advertisement for an auction over at Ferring, and this musical box was there. Persuaded my wife to let me bid for it, because she held the purse strings, and I think I got it for £100.
My goodness, and how many years ago was that?
About 28, 30 years ago.
And what state was it in?
It was in a very battered state, a lot of wormholes, which I had to fill. I've re-French polished it.
I mean, the work that you've done is terrific. And of course, the fascinating thing about this box is, as it says on the tune sheet here, Voix Celeste, angel voices. We in England rather commonly call it an organ box, which I think a reed organ. I think Voix Celeste is such a wonderful description. These pins in the centre operate a different row of teeth, and they are directly linked to a little reed organ.
Yes, that's right.
And it gives this wonderful sound. Now, you bought it for £100.
Yes, I can remember. I thought that was a lot of money in those days.
It was a lot of money, and it's still worth a lot of money. Today, I would have said a box like this would be in the region of perhaps £2,000.
Right.
Great. And I want to give myself the treat now of listening to it. Now, who is this handsome young man sitting on your knee?
Well, he's called Musing Teddy.
And is he amusing?
He is.
Let's see what he can do to amuse us. Well, he's got a very sort of startled look in his eye, hasn't he? He's got this incredibly alive expression with these big eyes, and he's got a very completely bald muzzle. That's nothing to do with you, but this is how the bears were made, with what's known as a shaved muzzle.
Oh, right.
So all this lovely long mohair plush was shaved off to give him this sticky out and bald nose.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that he was yours.
Yes.
Are you going to date yourself and tell me when you... Isn't it rotten? Nobody asks you to date something if you've bought a plate in, but as a bear, you've got to date yourself.
I think he originated in 1928.
Ah, well, that fits in. Because there are lots of indications here which tell me who he may be made by.
Oh, good.
Coming down to his arm, at the bottom here, the way that these claws are stitched is very idiosyncratic. It is something rings bells then for one particular maker. Yes. And then coming down to his feet, if you look at the bottom of his feet, you can see that they're narrower at the top and they bulge out. So they're sort of pear shaped like a fruit, like a pear. Pear-shaped feet. But what really makes me certain of who he may be made by is the fact that when I squeeze his tummy, you can hear a little musical melody. Is that something you used to do as a child?
Yes, that's why he was called Musing, which I couldn't say music. Musical Teddy.
I see. That's great. Yes, it's wonderful. And that seems as if
it has a complete tune.
Great, and it's in good working order too. So I can tell you who he's made by.
Oh, good.
There was a man called Joseph Pittman, based in Nuremberg, and he registered a particular company name called Joppy, Joseph Pittman, Joppy, J-O-P-I, in 1922.
Yes.
And this is a Joppy bear. So everything about him screams that, and more particularly his tummy tells you that by that very particular hand-squeezed musical movement in his body. And value, what do you think?
I don't know.
Oh, go on, have a guess.
A few hundred? As a guess?
Certainly a few hundred. In fact, this particular type of bear has become incredibly popular with collectors, particularly when these bears are in really good condition, which I have to say yours is. And a few months ago, a bear just like this fetched £2,100.
Really?
So, that's where the market is, that's where the value is, and actually I think that's where the heart is.
Absolutely.
We built our house to accommodate this gong.
Oh, wonderful. What a nice
wasn't
idea.
Very pleased.
That's fantastic. Where did it come from?
My husband's great uncle was born in 1870 in Aberdeen, and at the age of 21 he went out to China and joined the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank.
Really?
And stayed there for 35 years, but had served in different parts of China, and he must have bought this somewhere on his travels.
It's probably a temple bell.
Right.
There is a bit of an inscription running around here, but unfortunately it's Chinese, which I don't read. Not that I read Japanese very well, but all I can make out are the last 3 characters here, which say 83rd year. So it's possibly something to do with a dedication to a temple or something like that.
Right.
Have you any knowledge at all?
Some Chinese academic friends who've been to our house have found these characters difficult to read. But one thing they do say is that there's some sort of a reference to a lunar calendar or sort of thing like that.
That's exactly right. It works on a different system. By the look of the calligraphy, to me, it's not actually terribly old. I think it's probably late last century, something like that. In which case, the stand is near contemporary.
Right.
This is wood with lacquer over the top. Do you know what lacquer is?
I do, yes.
Go on, you tell me.
Well, they paint layers of paint and some sort of gluing material on in layer upon layer upon layer, I understand.
Do you know where the lacquer comes from itself?
It's from a plant, isn't it?
It is. It's from a species of rus.
Oh, is it?
Yes, and it's actually, when it comes out, it's deadly poisonous.
Right.
They have to process it. And then they, as you say, build up layer upon layer. And it produces this wonderful glossy finish, which is impervious to liquids, to alcohol, to heat and cold. It's the most wonderful material. It's such a wonderful piece of interior decoration that I think we're probably looking at £2,500 to £3,500 for that.
Goodness me.
Can I give it a whack?
One thing particularly enchants me is this little pecking bird who tings away on the bells there, which you don't often see, so it makes quite an exceptional sort of musical box. This piece was actually made by George Bendon, an Englishman working in St. Croix, just outside Geneva, in about 1870. And you've kept it in the most remarkable condition. Obviously, you haven't played it a great deal. Today, its value is somewhere in the region of about £2,500 and £3,000 at auction. So very, very desirable.
Indeed.
Does it still play?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
So can we have a quick whirl?
Yes.
Okay.
Nice.
Here we go.
It's the first album that the Beatles made, which is, rare in its own right, but that is fantastic because unlike most of the signatures that I see, these are actually right. Now, you, Geraldine?
No, I'm Colleen. My dad was a policeman and he was a sergeant, and he was at he used to protect the Beatles when they were at Finsbury Park Astoria, so he got to know them very well and he asked them to sign it for us.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
It's valuable. It's going to be worth something in the region of £1,000 to £1,500. It's very, very good, rare and desirable.
So
well
I can't
done.
let the kids play with it.
Definitely not.
It was left to me by my granddad some years ago when he died. There was a story that it used to belong to Edward Algar at some point, but unfortunately we've never been able to prove that. But that's just a family story.
Well, that's an interesting connection. Do you know when it dates from?
No, not really. I've
Well,
never had it dated.
The date is around 1835, 1840, so early Victorian times. And harps of this date tend to be of two styles, either Grecian or Gothic. And if we look at this one, we can see that it's very much in the Grecian style. You have here these carved gesso figures of the winged ladies going down to the fluted column and the typical Grecian lyre below. So very much in the Greek style. And over here, you have the swell pedal, which you press and it opens the four apertures here, which is if you want to play the harp fortissimo. So if you want to make the sound that much louder. Well, harps were extremely popular in the late 18th and early 19th century, not only in this country but also abroad. Marie Antoinette was quite a harpist and she popularized it in France. The Gothic harps tended to be more for the concerts, perhaps, the concert halls and the professional musicians, whereas ones like this, the Grecian harps, were more perhaps for family playing, and if you had a musical soiree in your Victorian home, someone would probably be playing the harp. I particularly like the decoration here, the way that it's painted red, and I think all the paint is original, and you've got the foliate decoration, and it's a very striking example of a harp. Do you have it on display anywhere or not?
We keep it in the dining room where it's nice and cool and out of the direct light, really.
Have you ever thought about having it restored or not?
It's something that we thought about, but my granddad used to say that he'd had somebody round to look at it and they said that it couldn't be restrung because it wouldn't be able to cope.
I think that's right. I think it would be very difficult to restring it properly, and I think it should be enjoyed as a decorative object rather than a musical instrument per se. What about value?
I have no idea.
Well, I would expect it to fetch in the region of perhaps £1,500 at auction.
I love it. That's all of dirt jig. Well, you could do one if you like. Good dress for it. Absolutely, yes.
I think we've got the gist
Right,
of it.
we've got the gist
That
of it,
was
yeah,
his
yeah.
most famous song.
Most famous.
And here, this is the piano
on which song
he actually composed
and many others
this
were composed,
song
yes.
on it. And I noticed that it says here, acquired
by Jimmy Logan.
By Jimmy Logan, who was the comedian.
The famous Scottish comedian.
From Lauder Hall.
In 1966.
In 1966.
Yes, Lauder Hall was Sir Harry's last home just outside of Straven.
Yes.
He had several homes during his lifetime, but he retired to Straven with his niece Greta. And Greta was a great friend of my grandmother's. And of course that, and the fact that my grandfather often used to sing "Keep Right On to the End of the Road" in the car when I was 6 or 7 years old, gave me an initial interest in Lauder.
Now I see you've got a couple of photographs of the old man himself, or at least him in old age.
Yes,
here.
this was at Lauder Hall, and these were actually items that were in Lauder Hall and sold from his estate.
Right. What I noticed was in the collection,
yes,
you've got books and all sorts, but you haven't got a stick.
Ah,
what
yes.
about a wobbly stick?
Well, you know, funny you should mention that. Last year I was at an auction in Edinburgh, and there was a stick, and it got to about £1,500, and I bid one more time, and then I thought, well, you know, there is this bush, and it's called the Lauder bush. And being a Scotsman, I thought I would just grow one rather than buy one.
Oh, very Scottish of you. I think that's absolutely splendid. Well, it's an incredibly difficult thing to value. The piano itself, for example, is not a particularly valuable piano.
No.
But the Lauder connection absolutely makes it.
Yes.
And I think it would be wonderful if you actually put it up on display.
Well, that's what we hope to do.
Sir Harry Lauder. He was knighted after the war for
his work for the war service. Yes,
of course. Well, you've got well over £10,000 worth of stuff here, and it's been a pleasure looking through it.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So you're going to be the frog.
Well, if I must.
Yeah.
These are musical blocks, Australian musical blocks.
That's right.
To teach children the alphabet and how to play a tune, right?
That's it,
In
yes.
Australian?
Of course.
Okay, I'll
yes,
be the
nowhere
frog.
else.
Frog. Are you ready to go?
And the crocodile, let me
Where's the
remember
cat?
where the cat. The cat's in there, that's
Yeah.
it.
You ready?
And we're going to want the goat as well.
You got the
which
goat?
is there.
Goat.
And the elephant, which is by your
Okay.
left. Okay, off
Right,
you
we're
go.
off then. Here we go, gather, ring, nuts,
frog,
in May, so early.
Cow.
Cow. in dog. The morning. Oh, beautiful.
They're great, aren't they?
Must be made in the war, under wartime restrictions.
That's
Where
right.
do you get this fantastic set from?
Oh, my sister picked it up from the catalogue of the dealer in the specialist old children's books. And it appeared as a one-off. And being a bit batty about Australia, she couldn't resist it.
Mad about Australia and children's books.
Well,
it's
that's
all
right.
very relevant, isn't it?
And there it is. It's
Fantastic
a way of learning
thing.
the alphabet.
I love it. I think,
Never seen anything like it before.
I think it's worth £150.
Do you?
Yeah.
Amazing thing, isn't it?
Marvellous, absolutely marvellous.
How long
Yes.
have you had him for?
I've had him for about 20 years.
Has he always behaved quite well?
No, well, it wasn't in very good condition when I first had it, and it's been repaired and a bit refurbished. And then, at the last time I used it, I wound it up and broke the spring. So
there he
we
goes.
had to have the new spring put in locally, which was very good.
Oh, well, that seems to have done it very beautifully, I must say. I mean, it's undoubtedly Swiss, and this rather sort of florid palette for the enamelling is a signpost to that.
Mhm.
And the reason that it is brightly coloured is because it's to attract an Oriental audience, really. It was almost certainly made for export to the Middle, if not the Far East. And it may date from... Well, I don't think this one's quite 1820. The fashion started in about 1820.
Yes.
And it went on because it was highly successful and highly amusing. I think this one's probably getting towards the end of the 19th century. But what did you feel like when you saw that for the first time?
I was amazed. I just couldn't believe it,
Couldn't
really.
believe it was true.
Especially when all the wires come up through that tiny little pedestal
Fantastic,
to operate
isn't it?
all the beak and all the wings and everything moving. It's absolutely incredible in my view. And they tell me the bellows in there, of which there are numerous bellows, are made of mouse skin.
Well, it could be mouse skin. It's a very odd one. Certainly chicken skin is the cliche
I've never
for
heard
it.
that, yeah.
They are miracles, really. It's miracles, tiny miracles to keep at home in a strange way. You've got to envisage a society where there's no television, no motor cars.
How wonderful.
And no cinema. And so entertainment had to be found in very small, intimate ways.
Yes.
And nothing was more amazing, really, in the 19th century than to open this marvellous box. I suppose the swan on the lid is a bit of a sort of hint as to the contents, isn't it?
I suppose, yes.
And it's a curiously sort of childlike thing, perhaps. I don't know. I mean, it's something that would amaze a child. Do you show it to children at all?
I have not, no.
No, quite sensible. They want to sort of snatch at this bird. And
exactly.
They're hummingbirds' feathers. That's why they have such and kingfisher as well, perhaps.
Yes.
No, a marvellous, marvellous thing, giving everybody great pleasure. And look how his head turns.
I know, and the beak opens.
Well, he suddenly got tired. We all have.
The chap's gone run down.
I know, we all need our batteries winding up. Well, anyway, he's not going to close quite, so we'll probably have to leave him there and wind him up again. Brilliant thing.
Yes.
Did you have him valued at all ever?
Not really, no. I've had one or two people look at it, just very interested and say what they thought, but no, not officially, let's say, no.
What did they say? Come on, they had a go, didn't they?
No, not really, no. The local chap valued it at about £4,000 a couple of years ago, but that's about all, really. Yes.
I think £4,000 is quite enough. I mean, it's a right value. I would go along with that. Sometimes they can be very much more valuable when they're gold, and sometimes they're gem set. And if they're made for the Pasha of Egypt, they might be bigger and much more exciting. This is a very, very good example of a Swiss singing bird box. What a joy, honestly, you are lucky.